Hi, my name is Mikey. This is Tyler. We're the founders of Innovative Start Organization. Our nonprofit is empowering future generations in financial literacy with the goal to inform, not persuade. And today we'll be talking about a few topics around economic uncertainty, investing, and also some other tidbits that we'll go into some tangents about. Again, we talked about a couple things in our last episode, that being unemployment and such. And then in previous episodes, we also talked about some economic factors. Again, we would just like to most definitely hit on some key topics. So if there's anything that we feel like is recognizable within the economic pieces that we want to talk about, or things that we feel like would help some of our viewers just as an overall discussion, we'll hit on. So if you have anything, please leave a comment. Also like and subscribe for the video. Let's get started. We're going to talk about some of the pieces about investing and economic uncertainty. So I'm going to pass it out to you to get the discussion going.
Yeah, one of the things we want to bring up recent topics is just the I don't know if you want to call it a war, but the bombings between Iran and Israel. It's had a shake up on the market, especially happened in the weekends prior to when we're recording this. So the financial markets weren't open and they've been a little shaky the past few days. Um, Now, it looks like Trump left the G7 summit today when we're recording this on June 17th. So that doesn't make anybody feel any better about the situation either. So it's just really interesting. You know, one of the biggest things is it's the amount of, um, my personal opinion is the amount of time in the market instead of timing the market.
Mm-hmm.
So in these situations, or scenario like COVID happened, or whenever the Ukraine-Russia war started, the financial markets obviously took a hit during those times. What we or what I personally believe in, you should just keep consistently buying over time. When you look back over 5, 10, 20 years, you consistently buy, and the ups and downs over time, they average to be pretty good returns. So we highly recommend do not go the emotional route. Try to sell everything like the world's going to end. Be careful who you listen to. Obviously, you probably should have a little nest egg, some savings at some point. Your whole portfolio probably shouldn't be in any financial markets. Hey, maybe, I think it'd be safe to have some cash on the side as well, just in case. But um, if the stock market is down in red all day, maybe just close your computer, whatever, walk away, take a breath, take a breather. Um, but one of the things we wanted to talk about is just consistently investing in emotionally, um, or, just global economic times, for lack of better words, and how that affects certain markets. Um, yeah, you have anything you want to say, Mikey?
Yeah, I was gonna say, those are some good points you hit on. I think a lot of times, especially like now, I think the market has been certain like sectors, as I thought I was hitting on, especially like one of them being the oil industry with the current conflict going on over there. Um, there's just certain pieces that end up impacting certain stocks that are just related. It's not, you'll have some stocks still perform well because of the things that are happening as far as like maybe if there's a geopolitical conflict or any other aspect with like shortages and like something or whatever that is might not impact that same industry or whatever business is doing that. But um, for those ones that do hold a heavy side of the market, right? Especially like things that follow the S&P, the Nasdaq, etc. When you're looking at what moves those percentages throughout the day, those are those heavy industries that, indicate where the market is leading. So if you're heavy into technology and there's certain aspects within technology that there's a shortage in, or there's something that a current administration changes within the legislature for that technological aspect, you'll see some of those trends hit the stock market within whatever that is tied to. Key thing is is to not be emotionally invested, right? Consistency over time is going to show you those results. Again, I usually tell people just to say like, you can invest in trends, right? You can stay up to date with certain aspects and try to combat that, or you can just overall just put your money into the market and, over time it'll show that growth. All you have to do is just look at the S&P 500 or just some of those ETFs and their overall growth rate throughout the year, having that 10% aspect. Every day, the market is going to change. And when I say every day, like within that Monday to Friday of operating hours. But in that aspect, you're going to have those fluctuations. Anything between a 0 point whatever percentage up to like, sometimes even 3 to 4%, depending on how the market is operating. Those are those aspects that you don't need to look at because when you're investing, it needs to be from an overall picture point of view, right? You're looking to hit that 10% overall for the year. So again, always paying attention to how you're investing in the sense of not emotionally, but are you, investing in things that are heavily impacted by outside market aspects too? Because, like I said, you have those things that impact the stock market, and then just overall trends within that business itself, depending on if, the CEO is good or bad. Have they had any breakthroughs? Yada yada. So there are some stocks on the up. There are some stocks on the down. Thinking about like Tesla, I think has been fluctuating the most, just depending on their current CEO's position and the things that he's been doing. Has really fluctuated that company's stock price. So again, I think just looking at stocks as a whole and index funds and everything else, whenever that stock is issued, there's basically, that little share in the company, but that is used to help them make whatever financial ventures or decisions or whatever they need to do in order to grow that company, and then in return, grow your money within that company. That evaluation gives you that aspect of the stock market growth, right? What happens in the stock market though is speculation and all these other things that get impacted with that. So that just changes how it fluctuates throughout the day, month, year, yada yada. So um, yeah, but always be paying attention. Don't be emotionally invested in some of those aspects. Anything else you want to touch on with those two?
No, I think you hit on some good points. Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall, like I said, like even when I first started investing and just like learning how it works in different aspects, a good rule of thumb is just invest in, things that you already buy. So, most of the clothes you own or gaming devices, laptops, computers, makeup brands, things like that, like you can go and invest into those companies. For you people that, use social media as something that, you know, makes you try new things or buy new things, right? See what companies doing that, right? If they're always on the trend of getting through new things out into the market and people are buying that up, that is where you see that also another trend of, okay, their stock market their stock market price will probably rise because they're having, a successful business practice. Um, but yeah, so your favorite influencer's makeup brand gets bought out, then bam, next you know, you would understand that the market price will probably change for that. Um, the laptop that you use has had some callbacks on certain aspects within their devices or something like that. You'll probably know that that's going to come down. But yeah, just things to like pay attention to as you're looking at that. I'm sure when people think of financial stuff, it's not the most appealing things to look at, but at the same time, it also helps you in the future as far as investing your money. Two different aspects, like I said, you can do. We've talked about this in previous videos. Is a high yield savings account that stays almost right on par, depending on what you can get in as a percentage for that with yearly inflation, or you can try your luck within investing, especially on a consistent period basis, into an index fund or just like a mutual fund that gives you somewhere around that 8 to 10%, which is a little bit more than the average inflation rate per year. So just depending on, what you want to invest your time into, those are some things that could be some good starters. But yeah, anything else on that, Tyler?
No, then that's good.
Um, and then yeah, before we got into this call, Tyler and I were talking about um some of the work-life balance that happens and such like that. So, what I guess happens is that when Tyler and I graduated was pandemic-ish area, so most jobs were not in person. You saw at least anybody from a 2019 to about 2021 graduation period be mostly remote, and maybe like 1 or 2 days in office, if that, or scheduled office days. I remember that was a thing too. You would schedule whenever you come in just to make sure there wasn't too high of a capacity within the office to make sure social distancing and everything else was put in place. Um, but now what we're seeing post pandemic, and now that we're a few years out of that, is that more jobs are requiring people to be on site 5 days out the week. The biggest argument I think that comes from a lot of people who value work-life balance and flexibility depends on what kind of factors you have at home, right? If you work a job that has a commute of 30 minutes to an hour, those are things that can hurt how your work-life balance looks like, right? Say you work a corporate job where it's basically 9 to 5, essentially. These are some of the things that you would say, okay, this impacts how I go about my day to day, right? That means you have to get up probably an hour earlier, especially if your job commute or is 30 minutes to an hour, right? Then after that, you spend your time in traffic getting to work. You get to work, you're spending money on lunch if you didn't have time to prepare a meal or you didn't meal prep. So there's money out because you have to go into office, and that's also gas and everything else. Time there. So we're looking at about almost, hour and a half versus if I was at home, I can open up my laptop maybe 30 minutes before I need to log in just to get situated versus now I got to get in there, get situated, and then hop into these calls and such. Then after the workday, you still have that commute back, which is probably going to be a lot worse depending on how many people are getting out of work. Rush hour traffic is a thing because everybody gets up at that time. And these are factors if, you know, you're just a single person at home with no dependents. So let's factor kids into there, pick up kids, child care, everything else is going to come into those aspects. And a lot of jobs don't offer any child care or anything like that. So these are things that you have to look upon that, oh, okay, my job offers a stipend for childcare or anything like that. So this is also wear and tear on your car. You're traveling more on site. This is more miles on your car. This is you're gonna rack up expenses, new brakes, everything else like this. It's these little expenses that come here and there because I need to come into the office. Now, at the same time, me personally, I do believe being in office does help for like collaboration, understanding, asking questions. But at the same time, does it require you to be in office for 5 days out the week? Probably not. 3 days, I feel like is like the optimal time. That way you can at least have that flexibility, whether that's like throughout the week or at the end of the week to work from home and then have those aspects of stuff. Because in, in reality, I think a lot of people too, especially from our generation, if your parents worked a lot, right? You see a lot less of them, especially if, by the time they get off work, you're tired. That's another thing too. I feel like when you look at parenthood as somebody who doesn't have a child, right? It's hard to think about, wow, I just worked a full work day. Now I have to come home, cook, yada yada. Make sure that they're prepped them for bed, make sure that they did their homework. There's just so many aspects. So it's interesting to look at it from that aspect. What's your thoughts and opinions on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I agree. It has definitely changed since we started working during COVID, or at the tail end of it. Um, yeah, I think, I've heard some teams will do 4 days in office and then like 1 day optional remote. Obviously, that'd be like mostly a Friday or something, but I've heard there's some managers that are pretty flexible with it depending on the company. So it's all up in the air. But yeah, I agree. Human interaction definitely is, I think, important for a team.
Mhm.
I've worked on teams though where I never met my boss and they were out in the Mediterranean Sea area. So I mean, we would just have our cameras on, and you know, it was harder to collaborate sometimes. But there was just tools we could use to share screen, whiteboards, things like that. So um, sometimes it's not ideal, but it can be done. You know, I've had some coworkers that are in London, and I've never met them in person, but again, we've had our cameras on and things like that. So I think there's some ways you can get around it. But with how global things are, I think at some point some stuff will be virtual. Um, I guess it just depends on what kind of culture they're trying to build. I mean, I think like a startup culture, you probably want your everyone in the same office and things like that. But you know, again, I think it varies in my opinion. I would say though, ideally, probably for a company that's trying to build a certain culture, 2 or 3 days a week in office would probably be great for those companies.
Yeah, and then that just reminded me of something when you were talking about like virtual aspect. I'm not gonna lie, every meeting that's because in reality, if you're not on client site, all those meetings are virtual anyway. So you go into the office to have a virtual meeting. So the only thing that you can get out of being in office is team collaboration. Because other than that, like I said, like most of the clients that you work on or whatever are not in the same office building that you are. Like they're not coming to your office to have those conversations. They're wherever they are in their office or whatever. So those meetings are still virtual in an aspect. So it's like, can I have done this at home kind of like thing. So I don't know. Like I said, working 5 days out the week, most definitely I'm indifferent to. But a few days for sure could be needed as far as it goes. I think a lot of opinions, especially when you look at it from like a LinkedIn perspective, when people, speak about these aspects of work-life balance, is that, you know, uh, corporate people or people who have only known working 5 days out of the week, they'll say like, oh, well, this generation doesn't want to work or are lazy or they just have like a more privileged attitude about certain things. But again, when you look at it, we can see a perspective that maybe that they can't, right? Hey, maybe we want our parents more at home than at work in that aspect too. And then especially if you want to be a parent yourself or you already are, maybe you're seeing the impacts of having to work so much, commutes and everything else, and trying to balance all that while trying to have a family. We're not in the same, previous generations where one person could work and provide for the whole household. Um, Nowadays, both parents work, right? So where do you find that balance? Now, there's a culture, and I guess like other cultures too as well, where that has become an issue where work-life balance does not meet the demand to, have a family aspect. So if you look at like Japan or other Asian cultures where work is more prioritized over that work-life balance aspect, it's just harder to get into that, oh, how do we make sure that we, provide for our family while also having a mental health balance as far as, okay, do I take my work home with me? So, at any point in time, nowadays, after logging out, getting home, closing my computer, I'm tired. So, it is a lot to also have to deal with anything else out of that. So it just makes it a little bit harder. I think just from like a personal perspective. And then again, like even if you don't have a family, that is still a lot, just a commute and everything else. Having a job is a privilege itself, but again, flexibility also matters as far as if you want to keep a high employee retention. Probably those jobs that require, you to be on site every single day probably can't keep its employees unless some of those employees like to be in that aspect. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on that. Anything else you want to add to that, Tyler?
Yeah, I would just say like it varies on the person, you know, I think
Hmm.
that's what it gets down to. And also one thing that I was watching a video is like there was a couple that survived, a family that survived off of $50,000. Now they said like they don't. They stay at their house. They don't really go on many vacations. But and that was fine with them, but they cut back on a lot too. So that's just something to think about. If you want a certain lifestyle, you're going to have to sacrifice certain things. Or, and that's whether you want a nice, lavish lifestyle, you're gonna have to sacrifice things to make the money to afford that. Or if you want, just a more simple lifestyle, which is there's nothing wrong with that. You may not have the latest Lululemon clothes, and that may be fine with that person. Like maybe they don't care about designer clothes. I guess it's individualistic, is what I'll say. I think it can be done. I don't know if it can be done in the cities, to be honest with you, but I think it can be done. But
Yeah.
there is sacrifice to be had. Let's just say it that way. That it would not be easy.
Mm. And that's another thing too to add into like commute. Um, if you want to stay close to your job, which is most likely going to be located in a downtown city area, those places are expensive to rent or have any type of housing next to. So people be like, "Oh, just move closer or whatever," but then you lose out on money. It's what's the trade-off, right? You put the miles on your car and you pay for more gas and yada yada, but you also have the peace of mind of being out the way and not having to pay $1,000 more in rent versus paying that extra money in rent, maybe taking public transportation, but doesn't allow you the flexibility to move on the go whenever you want to. It's just, you know, it's a give and take as far as like what works best. And there's no one size fits all answer for that. But whenever those conversations happen as far as it goes, um, I am not sure like what companies use as metrics to say because a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, productivity is lower," but there's no concrete evidence that says that yes, my employee is working at home versus being in office. There's been a significant difference in the amount of work that gets done. If your work culture has deliverables and deadline sets, that should always be the case that the work is getting done. So maybe there's something that you need to change in those aspects. But just telling people, hey, you need to come in office and that's it and that's final or quit essentially, which has also been another talking, point of like maybe pushing people to come into office as a way to get rid of, certain employees or to um, basically have a quiet quitting almost in that sense, where you create an obstacle for your employee to force their hand, essentially. So, um, who knows what the true agenda is? The aspect are the people that do work really hard always fight to make those obstacles there versus the people who enjoy not working to live but living, and it's just like I said, like there's opinions to the matter as far as like what that looks like, but you're going to find a generation of people who are going to be more stubborn to just working their whole lives 40 plus hours a week and not having any other social aspect out of that. Like, I think we've moved out of that way of living when it comes to work. Uh, does not help that technological trends also are aiding in that aspect too, getting rid of some of those entry level jobs for these postgraduates, which we also talked about in our last episode. But these are just, factors to think about, some interesting reads you should also do. Again, you might not be tied into financial aspects and stuff like that, but as you're navigating the job market and that's something that you extremely care about, maybe it might be harder now to negotiate or find jobs that are going to give you that work-life balance because now, like I said, like the job market and economic uncertainty now makes it a little bit harder to be picky versus maybe a few years ago. um, Finding that balance for you, maybe negotiating that within, your manager or whatever that looks like for you. Um, that is probably your best option because, like I said, it's a topic that's debated a lot as far as reasons why being on site and being in office helps a lot. But I can argue both instances, and I feel like if it's gonna be on site, it doesn't have to be every day. Um, Virtual aspects does hurt, that in-person communication and relationship building. Um, but at the same time, you need your work-life balance. So couple days in office for sure. Um, Allowing people to have that aspect and just think about, stuff that doesn't just impact the company, but also impacts your employees, those people that do all the work for you. I just feel like that gets weeded out when they make decisions. But yeah, anything else before we wrap up, Tyler? All right. Again, talking about some of those aspects of investing in economic uncertainty and then also just work-life balance. Please tune in to our other episodes as we talk about a bunch of factors, financially related and economic related. And tune in next week to our next episode. So we appreciate you guys for watching. Like and subscribe and comment what your opinions are on work-life balance, whether you're a person who likes to have a remote position or somebody who loves to be on site. And yeah, we'll catch you guys next week. We appreciate it. Thank you.